Hello and welcome to the Cost Benefit Analysis Group 1 CBA Final Report presentation. Here we will break down the 2012 Cost Benefit Analysis Report, Comparative Cost Benefit Analysis of Renewable Energy Resource Trade-offs for Military Installations, written by John McFall and Paulina Rojas. This report looks into the possibility of using renewable energy sources at U.S. military installations. First introducing these 6 common types of renewable energy listed here, and then focusing on wind, solar, and geothermal sources in particular. This report was motivated by the appeal of energy independence, energy efficiency, and cost efficiency. The U.S. military would benefit from eliminating the dependence on volatile foreign energy and increase energy output while cutting costs. As such, the military under the Department of Defense, or DoD, planned out the Net Zero Initiative, where military installations aim to convert all input energy to output energy with no waste. As case studies, the report focuses on data from U.S. Marine Corps stations in Miramar, California, and Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, as the sites for potential installations. Throughout this presentation, we will see both the strengths and weaknesses of this cost-benefit analysis in further detail.
The target audience of the CBA is the Department of Defense, who will ultimately be the decision maker. However, the DoD's overall decision-making power is reduced by the fact that each military installation has its own set of energy requirements and limitations. As such, installation commanders and energy experts will need to evaluate and decide on specific projects regarding individual installations with further analysis. On a second note, the DoD budget is largely dependent on the decisions made by policymakers. A government that supports the idea of becoming more energy efficient could be more willing to increase the DoD budget to implement renewable energy projects.
This CBA looks at 3 different proposed projects and their costs. The first were the geothermal energy plant costs. This project proposed one medium-sized power plant with an estimated lifespan of 30 years. The capital costs were summed with the operating maintenance cost across those 30 years. The second was the wind energy turbine costs. These costs were calculated using one standard wind turbine with an estimated lifespan of 20 years. The costs in the paper were calculated on a per turbine basis. The last of the costs were solar panel costs. The solar panels that the project proposed had an estimated lifespan of 25 years, and they calculated costs on a per square meter panel basis. There were some issues with the cost provided by this CBA. The first was the Department of Defense was only looking at expenses from a budgetary point of view and did not take into consideration any non-monetary costs. The CBA only looked at capital and operating costs. The second issue is that there are very confusing calculations and tables used in the cost-benefit analysis. Oftentimes, the tables would contradict the work shown in the calculations, so it was very confusing for the reader to try to determine which costs were the ones they should be using. The last was that CBA didn't take into consideration the environmental impacts. Displacement and disruption brings cost upon wildlife conservationists that would have rather paid to see no harm done in the area.
After calculating its costs, the CBA moves on to calculate its benefits. Among those benefits, it lists meeting mandates for energy savings, installation securities, and an overall increase in efficiency and decrease in costs. However, this benefit is in no way given a monetary value and is excluded from the final benefit calculation. What is included, though, is a conversion from energy production to the monetary benefit of that energy production based on the value of energy at the time. Then that energy production per year is converted into an energy production per lifespan of each of the projects to give a final monetary benefit for the entire project. Then this expected value is converted to a net present value, and then that net present value is adjusted again for the risks involved with each of the projects. However, it is important to know that each of the projects had different lifespans. 30 years for the geothermal plants, 20 years for the wind turbines, and 25 years for the solar panels. This would skew the results since the longer lifespan projects would have a better time to get returns, and the CBA would be vastly improved if these different lifespans were adjusted for. Other adjustments the CBA could make would be to adjust its benefits based on the idea of marginal cost of public funds. That is to say, allocating public funds has an additional cost. So when money isn't spent on allocating these funds, in other words, when the projects themselves give benefits, they not only give the benefit directly from not spending the money, there's also a benefit from not having to allocate that money in the first place. So you should adjust the expected benefits with the marginal cost of public funds. Furthermore, there should be a monetization of the self-sufficiency that I addressed earlier. And lastly, there's actually a benefit to the government leaving the energy market, since it allows other consumers that were previously priced out to jump back into the market without being priced out. Lastly, there's the issue of externalities, which the CBA in no way addresses. There might be people who derive benefits from not having to worry about pollutants being used in energy production, and these willingness to pay to avoid those pollutants is in no way being counted in the total benefits.
On a larger scale, these projects impact key energy markets. Simply put, the implementation of renewable energy for military installations will result in a decrease in demand in the oil market with an increase in demand in the solar panel product market. The wind and geothermal markets are largely unaffected. The national energy market will experience effects as well, because as the government moves out of the civilian energy market, prices will decrease and consumer surplus is regained while deadweight loss decreases. Also, since this is a national level analysis, foreign markets have no standing and are therefore not analyzed. However, this report from McFall and Rojas failed to look into market effects. They make little mention of it and they perform no calculations for it, which means that it is virtually impossible to predict market changes, including movements toward or away from equilibrium, social surplus changes, and deadweight loss. This large omission is one of the reasons why this CBA falls short. Likewise, another pitfall is its relatively narrow range of analysis, as it only looked into 3 of the 6 types of energy that it had introduced. Moreover, it dismissed hydroelectric power for high upfront costs and failed to calculate any costs and benefits beyond the obvious budgetary expenses and revenue. This is a noticeable sign of a guardian mentality, which skews the analysis. To be a more holistic report, it could have analyzed more sources of renewable energy and considered all social costs and benefits involved. To further eliminate the guardian mindset, the report should reflect upon market changes and externalities, which it does not do. Indirect impacts such as unemployment and ecological disturbances are entirely ignored. Most importantly, the report's final recommendation is severely flawed. While it analyzed wind, solar, and geothermal sources each individually, it came to the conclusion that military installations should use a combination of these sources at each location for optimal performance. Also, since the 2 installations in California and Hawaii were used as case studies, the results were not applicable to all locations in the U.S., which undermines the point of analyzing a national level policy change. To remediate these issues, the report should have calculated performance with a combination of energy sources while providing the means to make a more generalized approach which would apply to all locations. Generally speaking, this report mostly contains guardian-minded, surface-level details, and it could seriously benefit from being more thorough.
Implementing renewable energy projects is a compelling idea with multiple benefits emphasized by this CBA, and the decision maker, the DoD, should accept the projects. With pressure from policymakers to cut budgets, the DoD is keen to reduce their spending in the long run. And based on a positive NPV calculated in the CBA, it will benefit the DoD in the long run. And furthermore, the benefit of diminishing the dependence of the domestic energy grid strengthens the securities of installations, and on a national scale, having more renewable energy sources means not only less dependence on imported energy, thus reducing trade deficits, but also ultimately becoming more energy efficient, producing less pollution, and having a cleaner environment. However, there are pitfalls in this report that the decision maker, the DoD in this case, should pay attention to. This CBA stands on a Guardian perspective, as mentioned previously, thus omitting many key costs and benefits of having renewable energy plants besides the obvious monetary impacts. It does not consider the impact it has on a broader social context. In addition, while the CBA introduces different types of power plants in Chapter 3, only three options, geothermal, wind, and solar, are considered at the end in Chapter 4 for data analysis purposes. Specific scopes and sizes of these instruments are also chosen for easier calculations. It is clear that these data analyses are just case studies for demonstration purposes rather than detailed CBAs for specific projects. While it shows the potential of having positive NPV being attractive to DoD, new detailed CBAs on specific projects in different locations will need to be done for further decision making. Different options and more data should be taken into account in those CBAs. This CBA mainly gives a positive general idea on having renewable energy resources in military installations.
Despite its flaws, it's very likely that the CBA would still be persuasive to its target audience. Its target audience, mainly government agencies, follow the Guardian mentality, where they focus on revenue inflows and outflows rather than on societal benefits as a whole. The CBA addresses that by stating the Department of Defense has a limited budget and renewable energy can be costly depending on what regulations are binding. It acknowledges that the Department of Defense would likely be looking at revenue inflows and outflows, and it adjusts its own expectations to fall in line with that, and thus ignores larger societal benefits. So despite its omissions, it would still be very persuasive. Overall, the CBA has been effective, but also has areas that can be improved upon. While it is potentially persuasive and likely to influence the decision-making group, it neglects some of the impacts that the proposed projects might bring, especially in a broader social context. Thank you for listening.